Hey everybody, it's Ed back with another Manga Studio tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about doing quick flats in Manga Studio. I actually recorded this whole thing and uploaded it, and then the quality of the video was so bad because I'm using a new screen capture software that I decided I'm going to redo it. So if you got a link to an old one for some reason, hopefully this will clarify some things. So what I'm talking about today is quick flats, and what I mean by that is doing flats quickly in your work when you're coloring your comics. And I'll get into what flats are, but first I want to say a big thank you to Dan Hale, who let me use his artwork for this demonstration. So this is a comic page from a comic he's drawn called Empty Grave, and I will post a link to his stuff as well as to this comic in the video description, so you can check that out. So thanks a lot, Dan, and hope I'm doing your art proud. So what are flats? So let's say you have your line art here, you're finished, and you want to do some coloring of your line art. You usually create a colors layer below the layer, and you start coloring. Okay, well, what flats are is a way of being able to select large chunks of the character for coloring on another layer. So it's a separate layer. So I have a couple layers here. I have a blank flats layer that we'll use in a second, and then I have a flats example layer. So let me show you the example. So here I've just gone in with some crazy colors because, again, these aren't meant to be the final colors. They're meant to be they're meant to just be differentiated from each other. So I want to make sure, for instance, that her sleeves are a very different color than the butt of the rifle or from the hands. Okay. And what I would do is when I'm coloring, I'd grab my flats layer, I'd grab my wand from the current layer on the flats layer. Let's say that I'm coloring her hands, maybe plural. Sorry, I'm on the wrong layer. There we go. Grab maybe both the hands there. And you can actually, using the wand tool, you can turn this follow adjacent pixel on or off. If it's follow adjacent pixel, it'll just select like one hand. But if you have it turned off and you have a bunch of colors, things that are the same color, on the flats layer, they'll all get selected. So in this case, her skin tone's all one color, so it gets all selected. So I don't know, let's go with that for right now. So we go to we do that. We go to our colors layer. We grab maybe like a skin tone up here, and we hit fill. Okay. So notice that I'm not coloring on the flats layer. I'm coloring on the colors layer, right? I turn that off, and I still got that color layer. So why am I doing that? Well, let me show you as an example. Let's just say, let's make a very dark shadow here with the airbrush on the hand as an example. Okay, so say you were coloring along on your colors layer. Scale this down a bit, and you get in here and you start throwing in some real dark shadows, and on this hand, right? You're like, done, gonna go on to something else, start coloring on something else. Later on, you're like, you know what? I don't think her skin color is just quite right for some reason. I just, maybe I need to change that. So I might as well just start over and start a new base tone. So I'm on my colors layer, I grab my wand, and I go, okay, select that hand. But oh no, what happened? Well, what happened is it didn't select that area because it's now a different color. So the wand is going, I'm gonna select all the same color. That's a different color. So what the flats allow you to do is, if I go back to the flats and use the selection tool, I can still select those whole hands. So it's really useful for that sort of thing, and it's useful for you to be able to mask out things and that sort of thing. So so that's the use of flats. That's why you'd want flats, but they can be really tedious to make. And let me just show you an example of how people used to make it, and some people still prefer to make flats. So they go up here, they grab their color, like crazy green, and they go over here and maybe grab a pen. Something like the mono pen, which doesn't change color the harder you press and doesn't have any shape dynamics on it. Makes it really good for filling and blocking in color. So they just come in and they just start filling it in, right? And they go around the edges. And I'm not going to do the whole hand, but and then maybe grab the wand tool. Oops. grab that middle layer. I do not know what I'm doing wrong. No matter. Oh, that's why it's not. It's filling adjacent pixel is the problem. So they fill that in, and then that's their flat. But there's a couple good things about this, a couple bad things. One of the good things is if I lower the opacity of the line art, you can see that the color is actually making it under the line art, which is good for printing purposes. If something gets off in the printing, some of the plates get kind of shifted. If there's white under your line art, then you might get some weird prints out of it. I don't think that happens as much as it used to, but it used to be something that happened. The bad things about this, obviously, is you might color outside the lines like I did here, and then it's very tedious. So one solution you might think of is you might say, well, I know, Ed, what we should do is we should just fill, right? So we can grab our paint bucket tool, and from all layers, which is an option that you have in Manga Studio. So I do from all layers. Right now, the only layers that are showing are the line art and this thing that I just colored in here. So if I'm on flats, I can actually still just come in here and just fill this guy, which is a lot faster than doing that. And you can see that, in a very short time, I filled that whole thing in, didn't go outside the lines, which is pretty sweet. But the problem with the paint bucket, at least as it comes out of the gate, out of the package, is if I go up and I lower the line art, well, I actually accidentally filled in there, but usually if I'm just filling in those blank spaces, you won't get any overlap between the two. See how it's all gray? See over here, it's, you have a little bit of that overlap. So you need to account for that. You want to be able to use the paint bucket tool, but you want to be able to fill those edges. So I'll use this other hand here as a, let's just grab the lasso here and delete. Whoops, he's not the line art. There we go. Delete that guy, and then we'll come in and I'll show you the difference between the fill. So remember, this right hand I filled with the regular bucket tool. The left is a little bit different. So we're going to turn on this thing called area scaling. Okay. What area scaling does is it saves you some steps. So one thing you could do is you could grab your wand and you could come in here and you could grab, let's say we go to the line art and we grab inside the hand here, and then we could actually expand the selection, however many pixels, and then come to our flats layer and we could fill. So we do that, and you can see there's very light green lines there. So it did do its job, but that's like what, 4 or 5 steps there. Let's see if we can do one better. If we grab our paint bucket tool, I can't talk today, and we clicked area scaling, it comes out of the box at like 10 or something like that. I don't know. I don't actually know what this stands for, whether it's a ratio or number of pixels. I haven't really been able to figure that out. I do know that if it's a positive number, as in greater than 0, it will expand outward. If it's negative, it will expand inward and you'll be left with lines on the inside. So we want outward, obviously, for our purposes. And I can just come in here, grab my flats layer again, and I can just start filling that hand up. Right? I'm going kind of slow, but you can do this pretty fast. And then, contrary to the previous example, look at how much overlap we've got between the colors and the lines. So that's pretty sweet. So you could, in very short order, take this bucket and just start filling. I keep filling on the line art area because I'm giving you examples. Start just filling in, and you can change how much it closes gaps and things too, which is why it's stopping in a lot of these places rather than just filling the whole thing. And in grab another color, very quick order. You can come in and you can start filling in and doing your flats, and then at the end, I'm doing this with the microphone in the way, so it's kind of hard. You can kind of touch it up a little bit and fill in some of those spaces you didn't fill in. So that's pretty quick. That's a quick way to do it. That's how I did this entire example flats layer, and I probably did it in a couple minutes. But maybe you really like the pen. Some people like doing that. Maybe they just like the extra feeling of kind of precision that they have with it. Maybe there's some specific parts in the line art that you really want to adjust or something like that. So they want to use the pen. Well, one way you can use the pen and still help yourself out, we'll keep using the hands as an example here, is by using what's called a reference layer. And I think these are relatively new to Manga Studio. I don't know if they're new in an update of Manga Studio or if they're new like new in this version of Manga Studio, but that's neither here nor there. So what you're doing then is you're saying, hey, I want to use my line art as a reference layer so that my coloring doesn't go outside the lines, okay? So if I just grab a normal pen, let's grab the old G pen here. I gotta turn a couple things off. For my previous example, let me grab our green again. And we start filling in. That goes outside the lines, right? We don't want that. What we do want is we want it to not go outside the lines. So we have to do a couple things. The first is adjust the G pen. So we have to tell the pen that we don't want it to exceed lines. And then to do that, we have to click the pen, click this little guy down here. You can change all kinds of stuff about your pen, but for the purposes of what we're talking about right now, we're going to go to the anti-overflow feature. By default, yours probably will look like this. There's this little selection here called Do Not Exceed Line Reference Layer. If you check the box next to it, then the tool will do that, right? So it will not exceed a reference layer if you have a reference layer. You wouldn't necessarily know that from looking at the tool properties here, but if you click this little eyeball, it'll show up in your tool properties. So you can kind of turn it on or off. You can customize the things that you see so that sometimes you want to go outside the lines maybe, and sometimes you don't. So rather than having to go into the settings, if you can just add it as an option here, it's very easy to turn it on and off. And I'm going to do the same thing for area scaling, because not only do we not want to go outside the lines, but we do want to go slightly under the lines, just like we did with the fill tool. So that's all set. You can see that it's set down here. And now I can go in to my flats and start not exceeding the lines. Oh, wait, look at that. It exceeded the lines. Why did that happen? Well, it's because it needs a reference layer. So you have to go to your line art and you have to say, right-click it and say, Layer Settings, Set as Reference Layer. Or you can actually just click it and there's a little lighthouse button here you can toggle on and off. If it's on, then that's the reference layer. So now when I go in and I start, I keep doing that. I go on to my flats layer, very important to stay on the flats layer. Notice how the brush is going over the edge of the line, but the stuff that's coming out is not. Okay? And the center of that dot becomes very important, because if we exceed it like I just did there, then the line, the color that you're using will go outside of that line, right? So you can very quickly fill in using this tool, and you can be kind of like quick and rough with it, and you might occasionally, as long as you're mindful of where that little cross is, you won't exceed the line, right? Cross comes to the line, goes over and it crosses. Comes all the way up to the line, it stays, there it goes, right? You might not have this cross. To get that cross, you go to File, Preferences, fourth or fifth option down is Cursor. You can change what your cursor looks like for your brush, your pen, and your eraser here. Standard is brush size, but if you change it to brush size and cross, then you get that little cross. And I did that for the brush, pen, and eraser. Okay, so you can still use the analog sort of method with a little advanced technology helping you along the way to do your flats. And this isn't necessarily something you only use for flats. You might use it for other purposes as well. Blocking in certain colors. If you want to do some spotted blacks in some areas, you could do it that way as well. All right, so enough of that. The next option, so those are the two options for creating your flats. So let's assume that we have our flats already done. And how can we also use reference layers to help us in the coloring process? Well, we can change our flats layer to actually be our reference layer, which is pretty cool. And then when we're using the wand to click around and select things, we can change to From Reference Layer and make sure you have everything here selected the same way as you'd want. You know, you might want to turn on area scaling. That's up to you. when you're doing the coloring. So now when I'm on the colors layer and I select the hand, right, and I go in and I grab, let's just fill this in, and I go grab the shades and I grab this, go zoom in a bit, whatever. I start shading, shading, do. All right. Now, as long as I'm using that from reference layer and I want to reselect that hand, I'm just reselecting the hand. And that's because if I turn off the colors, note that it's basically you're telling it to ignore the layer it's on and go to the layer that's the reference layer, which is pretty fun, right? So that's a good way to get around the problem we had before where it wasn't selecting the shadow. One last little tip for the day is the dancing ants, as they're called. You can hide these in Photoshop. There's a command, I think it is like Command H or Control H. In Manga Studio, I haven't figured out how to hotkey it, but there is a little option up here to turn them on and off. So even though it doesn't look like it's selected, you can still see selection bar here once I turn them off. And I'll grab a really crazy color here to make it very obvious. If I come in here and I just start painting away, right, I'm still selected. Still selected. This reminds me of a Nick Cave song. And you can kind of see, you can turn them back on and off. And I actually have it down here set in my selection toolbar. I'll show you how to do that. You go to View, Selection Settings. Let me first just delete this guy out of here so I can show you it. Okay, so yours will look like this. You go to View, Selection Border, Add, and then you can kind of rearrange where you want it in your palette. If it's something you're going to use a lot, you know, maybe you want to rearrange stuff. Like I use these a lot, so maybe I want them next to each other. I click OK. Now it's right there, on and off, very easily. No matter where I select, come over here and select, on and off. Pretty neat, huh? So that should make things a lot quicker for you and a lot easier when creating flats if you choose to do so. Another option is you can actually just go in and do flats for this, you know, for the actual colors. So maybe instead of using these crazy colors, you go in and say, okay, I'm going to make this a white shirt. I'm going to make peach color for the skin, blonde hair, whatever. And then you can copy that layer over into a new layer and save it. You can use it as flats as well as a base layer for your colors, but that's entirely up to you. You can very easily just, I don't know if anybody's ever shown you this, but if you come over here and you hold Alt and then drag your layer, it'll create a copy automatically, which is pretty cool. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope that it will make your life a lot easier and less stressful, because that's what I aim to do here on this channel. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have some other tips and tricks you'd like to share in this regard, share them in the comments. And until next time, keep making cool stuff, and I will see you on the internet.